Welcome back, everyone. Today we'll be looking at games that I played here in St. Louis in the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz tournament. Now, there are 3 rounds of Rapid games every day. Now, unfortunately, yesterday I lost 2 games, but I did win the 3rd game against the Aronian. Now, today, another very tough day. I had 2 blacks and 1 white. So without further ado, let's jump into the first game of the day, which I played against the Frenchman, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. So I start by playing e4. He plays c5, knight f3, d6, d4, takes, knight f6. Now here I violate all the basic rules and I decide to play this move f3. Now as you guys will know, Grandmaster Benjamin Feingold has said never push your f pawn in the opening. However, there are some merits to pushing it in this specific position. First and foremost, I avoid the knight or setup with knight c3, a6. Secondly, by playing f3, if black tries to play a move like a6 or e6 here, I can play c4 followed by knight c3, and we have the classic Mamedyarov bind setup with the pawns on c4 and e4 controlling a lot of squares in the center. So Maxime here plays knight c6. Now I go knight c3. He plays e5, knight b3, and now we have a transposition into the Richter-Rauser variation or the classical variation of the Sicilian. Now another way you can get this position was with knight c3, knight c6, f3, e5. So back to the game, knight b3, bishop e7. I play bishop to e3 here. Maxime plays bishop e6. I go queen e2. Castles. Now the reason that I play queen e2 instead of queen d2 is that if I play queen d2 here, black can now play d5, opening up the center of the board. And by playing queen e2, if black plays d5 now, after pawn takes pawn, knight takes, I can actually castle here. And black has a lot of problems here with this pin on the d file. If he tries to castle, for example, after knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, c4, white will be winning some material here because black will lose either the bishop on d5 or the queen on d8. So Maxime castles, and now I castle long, and now he plays this move h5. Now, this is a very unusual move. The computer does not like it at all, and the reason is quite simple. The reason that Maxime plays h5 is that it stops me from playing g4, g5, expanding on the king side. At the same time, however, it does weaken this king side a little bit. If I can play g4 at some point, I'll be able to open up the g file here. Also, maybe, let's say I could play h3 just to illustrate the point, or even potentially opening up the h file. Now in this specific position, h3 is actually a very bad move because black can play h4, and unfortunately, due to the modern rules of chess, g4 would be a blunder here because black can play pawn takes pawn with en passant. So here I play the move knight d5, trying to take some space in the center, also preventing black from pushing the pawn on d6 to d5 later on. Maxime plays rook c8, I go king b1, sidestepping any threats on the c file here. Maxime takes, I take back, and now he plays this move knight to a5. Now here, after a bit of a think, I play queen to b5. He plays queen c7, threatening to take the pawn on c2. So if I were to capture with, say, the queen on a5, it's just a classic puzzle rush. Queen takes pawn, king a1, queen takes rook, knight to c1, queen takes knight, bishop takes queen, rook takes c1, and we have the classic back rank checkmate, also known as the ice skater. So here, instead, I play bishop d3, guarding the pawn on c2. Maxime plays knight takes knight on b3, and now I take back with the queen. It's worth noting I could maybe take with one of the pawns, but if I take with the pawn, black probably has something like a6, and now the pawn on d5 is very weak here. So I take back with the queen, keep an eye on the pawn, and now Maxime plays this move knight d7, and here, following sort of in the theme of the tournament so far, I just make a move quickly based on a simple miscalculation. Now, if I could redo this game, I would have played this move g4 here because it stops black from playing f5. Also, after pawn takes, now the king side is a little bit open here. I can play h4, h5, h6, or even g5, and black really doesn't have a lot of play on the queen side here. Something like knight c5, I can take, play h4, and without these pawns quickly advancing here, I'll be able to go h5, h6, or g5, g6, and the computer thinks this is already technically winning for white, which says a lot about why you don't want to play moves like h5 in this structure. So here I play bishop f5 instead, and I play this move very quickly. While Maxime was thinking about knight takes b3, I was thinking about this position with bishop f5, and I just played the move immediately without stopping myself. And unfortunately, Maxime plays g6 right away, and suddenly, to my horror, I realized that I'm simply a very bad chess player and I'd overlooked something really elementary. Now, the reason I played bishop f5 is I want to stop black from playing knight c5, because here I can trade and take the rook. And if black has to move the rook to, let's just say, d8, for example, again, I can play g4. And now after takes g6, for example, same situation with takes h4, h5, and white is doing very, very well here. Probably technically winning once again for a computer, but alas, it is not a very good move, because after g6, I have a problem here. Now, if I move the bishop away to d3, black can now play f5 here, and with ideas like e4, f4, black is doing completely fine. g4, for example, here is not a very good move, because after takes, black can play e4, bishop b5, f4, and now the king side remains a little bit closed, and black also has two connected passed pawns in the middle of the board, which are marching. So the reason that I play this move is, or the reason that I did this during the game is I thought, well, if he plays g6, I just take. And I just take the pawn on a7. If he plays b5, I drop back. I'm simply up a pawn on the queen side here. There's no real attack because the pawn on b5 prevents anything from happening on the b file, and I should just win the game, right? So when Maxime played g6, suddenly to my horror, I realized that after takes, bishop a7, which I ended up playing anyway, black has just a very basic move, pawn to b6 here. Now, again, if I were to take with the queen after rook a8, I'm going to lose the bishop. And when I take with the bishop, he can now go rook b8. And the problem is that even though I'm up 2 pawns, there's this very nasty pin. I cannot break it with queen e3, for example, because after queen to b5, I would lose the bishop or get checkmated on b2 here. And so the only way to sort of play here is to go a4. But now after bishop d8, I have to play a5. Takes, rook b7. And the problem is that, once again, I'm temporarily up 2 pawns. But in this situation, unlike the other position, and let me find that position again, like this one, I'm up a pawn here, but there's no activity because this b file is closed. But in the game, that's not the case here, because black is going to go rook b8 takes, and additionally, all 3 of these files are open. The a file is open, the b file is open, and the c file is open. So the 2 rooks are very, very powerful here. So now I play rook h1, rook b8, queen d3, takes, and b3. And the idea is very simple. I want to go king b2 and maybe rook a1. So Maxime plays rook b5, king b2, and here he finds a very, very good move, queen to b7. Now, the reason this is such a strong move is if black tries to play something like queen a7, for example, and line up a double or a triple stack on the a file, I always have rook a1 here, and now I'm simply controlling the a file, and after queen b7, I can go rook d1, and white is quite a bit better here. Mind you, computer still doesn't think it's overwhelming, which says a lot about how active the rooks and the queen are on the b and c files, but nonetheless, there are chances. But after playing queen b7, the problem here is that I can no longer really play rook a1, because then I will lose this pawn on d5. Additionally, I can never play c4 to reinforce the pawn on d5, because then black captures on b3. So I can't really play rook a1 without losing the d pawn. And additionally, black has very simple ideas like rook a5, rook a8, and queen a7, and using this open file here. So after a bit of a think, I play this move f4. Now, the reason I play f4 is quite straightforward. I can see the looming danger with black lining up a double or a triple stack on the a file, and I figured that I need an open file of my own here on the e file. And after pawn takes rook e4, I can line up my own double stack, and I should have adequate compensation, or at least I won't lose the game because of threats like rook e8 and something happening on this long diagonal towards the h8 square. So Maxime plays rook a5, I go rook de1. I have to use this open file before black lines something up on the a file. So Maxime plays queen a8, it guards against rook e8, it also still threatens rook a2 as well. So I go queen c3 here, Maxime plays rook takes d5. If he were to check, I can slide back. Now my queen covers a1, and I'm still trying to create checkmates towards the h8 square. So rook takes d5 is played. I play rook takes f4, rook c8, and here I play rook a4, queen b7, and now I make a big mistake. I play rook c4. After the game, I realized that I probably should have just played queen f3 here. And again, white's probably very slightly better. I don't want to say it's anything substantial, but the point is that black still has a weak pawn, and I have these 2 connected pawns that can march up the board. Whereas in the game, after I play rook c4, he goes rook c5, not rook takes rook, by the way, because then I have check, king h7, and queen h8 checkmate. But after rook c5, now I have to trade, and after pawn takes, black no longer has this weak d pawn in the center of the board, and the idea is just simply to go c4, and this pawn is really never going to be under attack. So here I play queen f3, queen c7, we do a little bit of a dance here with the queens, and now I decide to play g3 here, trying to keep the game alive. Maxime goes c4, I play queen c3, queen b7, b4 is played, here he goes rook b8. Now I take, we trade queens on b4, king to a3, rook g4, and I go king b3, h4, rook e3. Now after takes, you'll notice that material is even here. Both sides have rook and two pawns. However, the king is cut off here. My rook stops the king from coming over, and the c pawn is going up the board very, very quickly. So Maxime plays f5, I go c4, plays f4, takes, I go c5, of course, and now he makes a huge mistake. He plays king g7. Actually, sorry, king g7 is not the mistake itself. I play c6, and now he makes a move that's very intuitive, but it's actually a huge blunder, which is he plays g5. Now, this move loses the game, but by this point, both of us were relatively low on time, and I did not use my time and think here, and it was a decision that I did use my time, but I did not come up with the winning line, which is I can play c7 here, and after rook f8 to stop the pawn from queening, I can go rook c3, rook c8, and now there's a killer move, which is this move rook to c6. Initially, you would think, well, king b4 is probably better, but after king f6, king b5, king f5, king b6, king f4, king b7 takes, I take g4. I simply cannot get my king back before black promotes the pawn, or I have to sack the rook for the pawn. Illustration: king b5, g2, rook c1, king f3, king b4, king f2. And now after rook c2, king f1, black will either get a queen, or I'll have to sack the rook for the pawn on g1. However, after rook c6, this is a very puzzle-like study. Now, if the king was on any other square here, for example, let me just put the king on h7. This is a draw because after g4, king b4, g3, king b5, g2. If I were to play rook c1 here, black queens the pawn, and when I take the queen, he simply takes my pawn, and it would be a draw. But with the king being on g7 in this position, this is actually winning because after g4, I go king b4, g3, king b5, g2, and now I have rook c1. And the point being that if black tries to queen the pawn, I take the pawn with check. If black takes the pawn, I take the rook with check. And this is also winning by one tempo because the rook gets over to capture the pawn. So this position is actually winning by force here, and if black plays king f7, king b6, now I'm in time here with king b7, and eventually I'll be able to win the pawn on g2 and win the game. So this was a huge miss by me. Very unfortunate because I did use my time here. Again, I think during the game I simply did not really see it. I forgot that I would be able to take this with check, and it's very unfortunate because what I play in the game leads to a draw with rook e8. He goes rook f7. Now I try to bring my king in, but the problem is now his king gets active, and eventually black can sack the rook for the pawn at the very least. I go king b5, g4 is played. I play rook e5 here. Same idea, by the way, trying to cut the king off from advancing with the pawn, but now it's too late because after g3, king b6, he plays g2, rook e1, and here Maxime finds a couple of precise moves. Rook e7, rook c1, and now he finds his check. This is probably the only move to draw the game here because, again, it's the same idea with c7. Pawn is too far advanced relative to king. King can't get down to f3 or f2 quick enough, but unfortunately he has rook e6, and he starts checking. If I go king d8 here, by the way, after rook g7, this is also a draw because if I play c7, black queens, I take, he takes, I make a queen, and there's rook g8 to just save the game. So I play king d6, rook e6, king d5, and now he just checks, and he finds another important move, rook to e6 here, and now I play c7, which allows black to promote the pawn to a queen, and after rook takes pawn, there's rook c6. I can no longer guard this pawn on c7. Neither the g7 or c1 squares are available for my rook, and the game simply ends in a draw here. I play a couple more moves, and then we trade the rooks, and the game ends in a draw. So this is a very disappointing result for me, certainly, to draw this first game up against Maxime here. I had a couple chances. I really regret playing bishop f5, but then missing this rook c6 move. It's difficult, but again, I used some time. I just didn't see it, and I was getting low on time, so it does happen. But still a huge miss nonetheless, and unfortunately, I draw this fourth round against Maxime. Now, again, we're not going to go through all the games in depth, so I'm going to move right ahead to the sixth round game, which I played against Jan Nepomniachtchi after drawing my fifth round game with the black piece against Hikaru Mamedyarov. Now, it's worth noting, after that first game with white today, I had two blacks in a row against two super GMs. Very tough, so the goal is just to get through the day. So I draw the second game against Shaq, and now the final game, we'll move into this game I played against Jan Nepomniachtchi. Now, one thing I have to say about Jan is he's very clearly the best prepared player in the world at the moment. He did a lot of preparation for his match against Magnus. Now, many people saw that match, and they saw very limited openings, so they thought that Jan didn't do great prep, but he did a lot of work across many openings, and we didn't really see all of it because there were only a couple of openings that were featured in the World Championship match. So d4 is played. I play knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5. He goes g3, and we get a classic Catalan. So I take queen c2, and now I played b5. Now, this is actually what Jan played against Magnus in the World Championship with the black pieces. So obviously, he's going to have a lot of ideas and a lot of preparation. So here Jan plays a4, bishop b7, takes, I play a6. This is all standard theory. Takes, rook a8, takes, knight b5, bishop d5, rook d1. Play knight c6, Jan plays queen a4, knight d7, and now he surprises me with h4. Now in this position, I had looked at a couple of moves prior to the candidates. I had looked at knight c3, I think I had looked at bishop f4, and there was one other move that's eluding my mind at the moment, but I looked at a couple of different variations here, and then Jan blitzes h4, and already I'm wondering, why did I play this opening? In fact, frankly, I was thinking to myself, man, why am I playing this tournament? I'm playing as somebody who's clearly spending all his time preparing, and I'd be better off simply preparing by playing Genshin Impact. After h4, I play knight to b6, Jan plays queen a1, now I play queen d7, knight c3, threatening e4, so I go f5 here, Jan plays bishop f4, I play bishop d6, knight e5, queen to e8. Now here Jan missed something. Now I suspected at this point I was quite a bit worse. In fact, the computer confirms it, as you can see from the bar, but Jan was not able to figure it out. Now this is one thing that's very important when you look at many top level games, and even games of Magnus, for example. Sometimes you don't want to play the top variation, because at a certain point players have to use their own brain, and they're not going to be able to figure out why the computer loves the position or why it's winning. And this is one such case where clearly I did something a little bit dubious. Obviously I was not prepared for this, and I was just simply trying to wade my way through the complications. But when Jan finally is out of book around this point, he makes a mistake by playing this move e4. I take, he takes, we trade on e5 here, and now here was one of the critical moments of the game. After knight d7 f4, computer actually thinks after queen g6 targeting the knight, if white plays queen b1, I can play the very quiet move rook to b8 here, and there is quite a bit of pressure towards both the pawn on b2 as well as the pawn on g3 here. And computer thinks black is better. It's not anything special, mind you, but black is on the right side of it. However, with Jan blitzing and making every move pretty much instantly, I was already down over 10 minutes on the clock here, and so I tried to make a quick pragmatic decision by playing h6, which stops white from ever playing knight g5 and creating mating threats towards the h7 square. So Jan plays queen b1, I go queen e7, king h2, now I go rook b8, putting pressure on the pawn on b2, queen c2, now I play knight c5 here, Jan trades, and now he plays rook d2. It's worth noting he could have tried to take and play f5, but after d4 this starts to get very, very sharp. After queen e4, I can take and play rook b5, and with these two pawns marching up the board and e5 being weak, as well as f5 being weak, white probably has to simply trade off everything here and make a draw, but this would have been very double-edged. Instead, Jan plays rook d2, and now I play c6, solidifying my classic wooden shield here on d5. Great bishop on d5, and now Jan basically bails out with rook e2. Queen d4, we trade, I undouble the pawns, I create a chain of 3. However, white does have queen g6 here, and now I simply take the pawn on b2. I could have played rook b6, and computer thinks it's okay, but again, I already thought this was close to a draw, and I saw no reason to try to play rook b6, so I take, takes on e6 here, and now I play king to h8. He checks, and here we make a repetition and we agree to a draw. Jan could have tried to trade the rooks, but after takes and king h3 here, I can simply go queen e2. And if white doesn't really have anything better simply to make a draw, if he tries e6, I have queen f1. This is one way to draw the game. Repetitions everywhere. And the king cannot get outside the box. Additionally, besides playing the check, I can also go c3 with the idea of c2, and once again white would have to make the repetition by checking me on f5 and f8 and f7, and the game would be a draw. So we do agree to a peaceful draw here after the repetition, and I end the day with 3 draws. So overall, I'm quite happy with my play today. The first game against Maxime, obviously I missed my chances. I really wish I could have won that game, but overall I thought I played well. And after yesterday, where I did not play well at all, 2 losses and 1 win, it's very good to sort of settle into it. And fortunately for me, it feels like nobody's really running away with the tournament. So even though I'm not doing great, I'm 1 or 2 wins away from potentially being back in first place if I can win some games with the white pieces tomorrow. So it's all looking good so far. Obviously, I'd like to be on a better score, but today I played well, and there really isn't much more you can ask for other than to play well. And if your opponents play well in kind, then what to do? That's just how it goes. So overall, I'm very happy. I would have liked to have won that game against Maxime, but it is what it is, and I can't complain with my play today. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap. I know that I really only went over 1 game in depth. But again, I try to find critical moments from the other games as well. So we end the day with 3 draws. I think I'm still maybe in 8th or 9th place. But again, there's only 1 game, 1 victory separating me, I think, from first from not first, sorry, but from like maybe second or third place. So long way to go. We have 18 games of Blitz. There still are 3 more rapid games. So there's 21 more games of chess here, and anything can happen. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap. If you have not already subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button below, and I will be back tomorrow with more recaps from the rapid portion of the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz tournament here in St. Louis, Missouri. See you guys soon.